Hello there. I'm going to start a readathon. We are going to start to read this whole book. I am going to read Wealth, Poverty, and Politics by Thomas Sowell. And together, we are going to complete this book. Every chapter I read in this book, I will give my thoughts and opinions on. And I will start to read now. I'm going to read the introduction chapter of Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. By the way, in case you were wondering, you are someone and I'm someone else. That's a weird way to start a video, but that's what we're going to do. So, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. We're going to start to read this book. Okay, you don't have to watch the video, you just have to listen. You're just going to have to listen to my voice as I tenderly go through the pages. Let's go through the table of contents first. Preface chapter. Chapter 1, Issues. Part 1, Geographic Factors. Chapter 2, Waterways. Chapter 3, Lands. Chapter 4, Climate, Animals, and Diseases. Part 2, Cultural Factors. Chapter 5, Cultural and Economics. Chapter 6, Cultural Diffusion. Chapter 7, Culture and Progress. Part 3, Social Factors. Chapter 8, Population. Chapter 9, Mental Capabilities. Part 4, Political Factors. Chapter 10, Political Institutions. Chapter 11, Politics and Diversity. Chapter 12, The Welfare State. Part 5, Conclusions. Chapter 13, Economic Differences. Chapter 14, Implications and Prospects. Chapter 15, Causation versus Blame. Chapter 16, Goals. Acknowledgements chapter at the very end. Preface. This is the preface chapter. Are you listening? I hope you're listening, my kids. I hope you're listening. Okay, this is the start of the chapter. I'm going to start to be serious now. Factors that are stubborn of things, whether to be our wishes, our inclinations, or our dictates our passions, cannot alter the state of facts and evidence. John Adams. Both the first edition of this book and the revised and the large edition differ fundamentally from most other discussions of economic differences between nations and within nations. Many policy proposals for ending poverty or reducing income gaps, disparities, or inequalities, which abroad in other discussions of economic inequalities, will not be found here. Humanitarian goals of these many policy proposals are important, but precisely because those goals are so important, it is crucial that these proposals are based on the understanding of actual facts about the causes and consequences of economic inequalities. This book seeks to clarify some of these causes and consequences. If it seems to be a modest task, a task which negate has led to a plausible sounding policies that turned out to not only be ineffective but painfully counterproductive, in some cases catastrophic. It is especially painful when policies are to help poor misfire and leave the poor worst off, since they have less margin with which to observe the consequences of other people's errors. Many who are shocked and puzzled by large economic and other disparities between individuals, groups, or nations have been driven to seek some angle, a single factor, whether genetics, exploitation, or whatever, to explain why some are so prosperous while others are so poor. The implement assessment seems to be that people would not differ so much that their outcomes with some major differing factor, whether it be caused by genes or human interventions, that favor some at the expense of others. But where there are some endeavors with great disparities in outcomes, that does not necessarily imply the equality of great disparities among the people enraged in the endeavor. In many endeavors, there have been many prerequisites for success that people in the 9/10 of the prerequisites need to not be successful 9 tenths as often, but the fact to turn out to be other failures. Because many economic and other endeavors require multitude factors, those individuals, groups, or nations with most of those factors, but not all, can be poverty stricken and backwards for generations or even centuries, and all of a sudden a surge of forefront of human achievements after they acquire the remaining factor or factors to be required. Some examples are such as the 18th century Scotland and 19th century Japan will be examined in the chapters that follow. Conversely, a nation of the forefront of human achievements for centuries can lose just one prerequisite for success and fail far behind economic and technological progress of many other nations that formerly lagged behind it. China, as we should see, was an example of such a regression, in which the current progress of reversing again as soon as China's economic and technological levels are rising rapidly. This is not the book written to celebrate or to demoralize any particular racial or ethnic group, or any nation or civilization. It is an attempt to understand the effects of various factors that influence the economic faults of human beings in general. Rather than try to discuss such things in the abstract, hard facts are particular flesh and blood people. Hard facts about particular flesh and blood people are examined. Some of these facts can be inspiring and others appalling. In either case, do these facts or factors provide a base for grading or ranking whole peoples? Even though we are avoiding to attempt to grade or rank instinct merits of whole peoples, in call of a web of surrounding geographic, historical, and other circumstances, they do not seem to choose, but are equipped with the cultural that they did not choose, inherited from their ancestors they did not choose. We cannot go examine to pretend that all achievements are equally valuable or even approximately comparable. On contrary, one of these things can we at least hope to accomplish to gain some insights on what kinds of factors have promoted human achievements and progress, and which have led to suffering and ruin. It just so happens that the illustrations were involved in Russens, for example, the various negative factors, but the illustrations cannot pretend to be grading or ranking of Russens, which can require also considering many internationally recognized Russian achievements over the centuries in literature, music, and other fields. As well as great courageous stands out against tyrannies that arisen in their country, such as the military heroic example of Alexander Story in our times, but that would be very difficult and vastly larger book. The task undermined here is more limited and much more within the limits of human understanding and the human lifespan. One key implement assessments of our time in many economic and social outcomes tend to either be random, if left to the natural course of events, so that the strikingly uneven and non-random outcomes are so observed in the real world, implied by either some adverse human intervention or some genetic differences in people whose outcomes are so different. Assumptions remain implicit to escape scrutiny even by people who are built on a whole structure of beliefs and improvise of the foundation of such assumptions. With the decline of belief in genetic determinism, the implicit assessment of evenness or randomness of outcomes is absent of human interventions that has been enough to turn a search for causation into a search for blame. Declarations of blame can be in rigorous voices of a street corner, demagogues, or the husband tones of learned judges in agas of judicial chambers. In many contexts, this has reduced the exploratory options of blaming the victim on blaming the presumed victimizers. As a result, even among some academic scholars, the search for the truth has been too narrowed for the search for blame, and taking sides. One small but revealing side of this taking sides is blocking the release of data on the people of the other side who might use that data against our side. Whether the particular issue of affirmative action, global warming, or whatever, more generally, taking sides can all be too easily mean of taking social issues involved in the fate of millions of our fellow human beings, as if they were this internal contest among intellectuals or politicians. Yet, the absence of implicit assumption of evenness and or randomness, a search for causation turns up many factors far from even or random, including geographic, demographic, cultural, and political factors with great influence on outcomes. Even if none of these factors may not be determinate outcomes by itself, this book examines such factors, not exclusively, but in addition of other factors, some, including some for which human beings can be blamed, as conquest and enslavement, but no presumption of those things which arouse our moral inclination have caused more casual weight than those things that we see as simple matters of fact. This does not imply moral neutrality, but simply the recognition that morality and causation are different things, and that the general importance between each reason to avoid the crossing one with the other. In addition, the problems of implicit assumptions which escape scrutiny precisely because they are implicit. Much confusion and mischief can result in the words which have so many different meanings and can spawn mutual contradictory beliefs, imperatives, and policies. Equality, freedom, and justice are among the words which have played that role, though each of these concepts can be more defined more precisely in ways to bring out their enormous importance in specific contexts. Yet, that has led these words being used very different senses from very different purposes by politicians, ideologues, and others. In this inconsistent and mutual contradictory senses, that many concepts deserve a warning of a philosopher, Charles Sanders Peirce, against cherishing some vague shadow of an ideal, too meaningless to be falsely false. A charlatan-like words are convenient for politicians and ideologues, and for that very reason require special scrutiny by others who do not wish to be trapped by words. Even statistics may be accurate in themselves, can be extremely misleading if words that they say what the statistics are measuring are incorrect. This applies as much to be said at the top 10%, that the top 1%, and other great income categories we shall see too often. Wealth, Poverty, and Politics is not the book about language or philosophy, however. It is a book about facts, but the facts do not speak for themselves. They speak for or against competing beliefs or competing theories. If the study of facts cannot be always be definite, at least it can be clarified, and there are few issues more that we need to clarification with issues involving wealth, poverty, and politics. Thomas Sowell, the Harvard Institute, Stanford University. That was the Preface chapter. It was only 4 pages long. And I have to say, that was the perfect introduction for this chapter. I probably wouldn't have talked about the philosopher that much, like if I was writing this kind of book. But he is saying that we're not going to delve into the language. Like F.A. Hayek talks about liberty and all these, like he actually brings up these terms. Thomas Sowell doesn't bring up this, so he clearly is not a F.A. Hayek, obviously. But it's very interesting that he talks about the same thing F.A. Hayek talks about, how liberty can be used just as much in a dictatorship as it can be used in a voting republic. And so it's very interesting to see how different sides of the coin can use the same term and it meaning vastly two different things. Some says freedom from something, freedom to something. They're two different, and like, the Soviet Union, there was freedom from the from the Americans. You don't, or whatever. Like, you don't want to be towards the Americans, but it's freedom to your money. You're entitled to all the money that the Soviet Union makes, all the workers equally. So it's very interesting to me how, like, freedom to something or liberty to something can be vastly used in different contexts, and that people value freedom or liberty in a different way than other people would. So in that sense, I mean, I don't think he delved into that, but I know that F.A. Hayek does talk more about it. But I mean, this book's basically about explaining why different countries are richer or poorer based on, and I have a theory on how he's going to measure it. I think he's going to measure it by free trade. I think he's going to measure it by the coastline of Europe, how the coastline of Europe is so much more stretchier than Africa. That's my main theory, because I've read a lot of his books, and he does talk about the coastline of Africa a lot. So I'm guessing he's going to talk a lot about free trade. He's going to talk about, wealth, poverty, and politics. What else is he going to talk about? He's going to talk about how political actions can lead to negative outcomes in the creation of wealth or poverty. I think that's what the book's going to be about. Based on the preface, we haven't read anything too major yet. Chapter 1's kind of be called, I think it's called Issues. So when we read chapter 1, next video, which I'm planning on doing, when I release that out, I'm going to make a video review just like this right after I finish that chapter. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's about 16 minutes long. It's getting longer than that now. You are someone, I'm someone else. I'm reading Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. This was the prefix chapter of Wealth, Poverty, and Politics by Dr. Thomas Sowell.